He came to the shelter to fix a broken door. He left with the dog who would one day keep him from disappearing. Staff Sergeant Caleb Turner arrived at the county animal shelter just after 4 in the afternoon, when the Oregon rain had turned the gravel lot into a gray mirror and the air smelled of wet pine, old leaves, and cold metal. He was 41, a white U.S. Marine with a quiet face, a dark work jacket, and hands that knew how to repair hinges, engines, fences, and almost anything except the silence inside his own house. He had not come looking for a dog. Emma Collins had called the Veterans Outreach Center because the shelter's back door would not latch, and Caleb was the kind of man who showed up when something was broken, fixed it without many words, and left before anyone could make a kindness feel personal. Inside, the shelter hummed with fluorescent lights and soft, restless sounds, paws shifting on concrete, water bowls scraping, tails tapping, a small whine from somewhere behind the kennels. Caleb kept his eyes on the toolbox. That was safer. Tools did not ask why his porch light had been dark for 3 weeks. Tools did not notice the unopened mail on his kitchen counter or the way he stopped answering his phone after sunset. Emma led him down the back hall. "Door is this way," she said. Then she hesitated near the last kennel. Caleb noticed because Marines notice pauses. At the end of the row lay a female German shepherd, black and tan coat, amber eyes, one ear tipped slightly lower than the other, body tucked close to the concrete wall. She did not bark when Caleb passed. She did not rise. She did not press herself to the gate like the others. She only watched him with the exhausted calm of a soul that had stopped spending hope too quickly. A card clipped to the kennel door read, "Sadie, 5 years old. Returned 3 times. Caleb looked at the words longer than he meant to. Returned. Not surrendered once. Returned 3 times, like an item that did not fit, like a promise people had tried on and taken back. "She is not aggressive," Emma said quietly. "Just shut down. People want a happy dog right away. Sadie does not know how to pretend." Caleb said nothing. The shelter roof clicked under the rain. Somewhere a dryer buzzed behind a laundry room door. He turned back toward the broken latch, knelt, and began to work. The screwdriver bit into the old screws. The door shifted under his hand. Behind him, the other dogs settled and started again, each sound rising and falling like weather. Sadie remained silent. That silence followed him more than the noise. When he finished, Caleb stood and tested the latch 3 times. Solid. Reliable. Fixed. "That should hold," he said. Emma thanked him, but Caleb was already looking toward the last kennel again. Sadie had moved while he worked. Not far. Just close enough to place one paw through the lower gap in the gate. Her paw rested on the exact spot where Caleb's hand had touched the metal when he first stopped. He stared at it. Mud-dark nails. Trembling slightly. Not asking to be taken. Not begging to be saved. Just meeting him at the only place he had allowed himself to touch the world. Caleb crouched before he could talk himself out of it. Sadie's amber eyes lifted to his. For one long breath, the rain, the fluorescent lights, the smell of bleach, and the ache in his chest all became very still. Emma spoke softly behind him. "Nobody wants her anymore." Caleb looked at the German shepherd's paw beside his hand. "That makes 2 of us," he said. Caleb did not sign the adoption papers that afternoon. He told himself he was only asking questions because Emma was standing there with tired eyes, and because Sadie's paw had stayed near his hand longer than any living thing had reached for him in months. Emma did not push. She walked him through the shelter office, past a corkboard of smiling adoption photos, and set Sadie's folder on the desk between them. "She needs patience," Emma said. "Not pity. There is a difference." Caleb looked through the glass window toward the kennel hall. Sadie had returned to the back wall, but her eyes remained on him. "Why did they bring her back?" he asked. Emma folded her hands. First family said she was too quiet. Second said she would not bond fast enough. Third said she stared at doors all night and made the house feel sad. Caleb almost smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Sounds like she was paying attention. Emma studied him carefully, the way shelter workers study people who think they are choosing animals when sometimes the animals are choosing them. "She does not trust exits," she said. "She lies near them, like she is waiting to be moved again." Caleb looked down at his own hands. There was grease under one thumbnail, a thin cut across one knuckle, and a pale line where his wedding ring had never been because he had never stayed in one place long enough to build that kind of future. "I am not looking for a project," he said. "Good. Emma answered. She is not one. The word stayed with him on the drive home. Rain moved over the windshield in thin silver lines. His truck smelled of old coffee, motor oil, and the wool blanket he kept behind the seat but never used. He passed the Veterans Outreach Center without stopping, though Pastor James Miller's old sedan was parked near the front door and the meeting room lights were on. Caleb kept driving. He told himself he was tired. He told himself he had done his good deed for the day. But when he pulled into his driveway, the house looked back at him like something abandoned politely. The porch light was off. The curtains were closed. Inside, the refrigerator hummed over nearly empty shelves. A stack of unopened mail sat on the counter beside his dog tags, which he had removed 2 weeks earlier and placed in a drawer he kept opening and closing without knowing why. He warmed a can of soup, ate half, and poured the rest away. At 9:40, his phone buzzed with a message from Pastor James. Missed you tonight. No pressure. Caleb read it, then turned the phone face down. The kitchen went silent again. But Sadie's kennel card had followed him home. Returned 3 times. He could see the words as clearly as if Emma had taped them to his door. Around midnight, rain thickened against the roof. Caleb stood by the front window, looking at the dark porch. He thought about the German shepherd lying near the kennel gate, not because she wanted to leave, but because she had learned leaving could happen without warning. The next morning, Caleb returned to the shelter before it opened, carrying a plain leash, a folded blanket, and a paper cup of coffee gone cold in his hand. Emma unlocked the front door and stopped when she saw him. You sure? She asked. Caleb looked past her toward the last kennel. Sadie was already standing, not wagging, not celebrating, just standing, as if some quiet part of her had heard him coming before his truck entered the lot. Caleb swallowed. No, he said, but I am here. Emma brought Sadie out through the side door because the front lobby was too loud that morning. A terrier barked near the desk, someone laughed too brightly at a puppy, and the shelter dryer thumped behind the laundry room like a nervous heart. Sadie walked beside Emma on a plain leash, head low, amber eyes moving from floor to door to Caleb's boots. She did not pull toward him. She did not hide from him. She simply stopped 6 feet away and waited, as if every new beginning needed to prove it would not change its mind. Caleb crouched slowly, keeping both hands visible. Morning, Sadie, he said. The German shepherd looked at his face for 1 second, then at the folded blanket in his left hand. Emma smiled faintly. Good choice. She likes having her own place. Caleb nodded. So do I. The adoption papers took less time than the silence between signatures. Emma explained food, medication records, the upcoming veterinarian visit with Dr. Rachel Moore, and the way Sadie sometimes refused meals the first week in a new home. Caleb listened like instructions mattered. Maybe because they did. When Emma clipped Caleb's leash to Sadie's collar, the small metal ring clicked. Sadie flinched. Not much, just enough for Caleb to notice. He lowered his voice. No hurry. The dog looked at him then, longer this time. Outside, rain had become mist. Caleb opened the passenger door of his truck and placed the blanket on the seat. Sadie stared at the opening, then at the shelter behind her. For a moment, Emma looked afraid she would turn back toward the kennel. Instead, Sadie stepped into the truck with careful paws and curled herself tightly on the blanket, leaving as little of herself exposed as possible. Caleb closed the door softly. The drive home took 28 minutes. Sadie did not sleep. She watched the road, then Caleb's hand on the wheel, then the side mirror where the shelter disappeared behind trees. Caleb did not play music. He had not played music in months. The truck carried only engine noise, soft rain, and the quiet breathing of 2 creatures who did not yet know how to trust a house. When they arrived, Caleb opened the front door and stood aside. Sadie entered slowly. Her nose moved over the threshold, the worn rug, the boots near the wall, the unopened mail on the counter, the dark hallway, the back door. She walked the perimeter of the living room once, then lay down near the front entrance with her body facing the door. Ready. Caleb saw what Emma had meant. Waiting to be moved again. He set a water bowl in the kitchen, placed food beside it, and unfolded the blanket near the couch. Sadie looked at the blanket, then returned her gaze to the door. That is yours, he said. She did not move. Caleb took off his jacket, hung it on the chair instead of the hook, and stood in the middle of the room unsure what people were supposed to say after bringing home a heart with fur and old fear in its eyes. Evening came early under the Oregon clouds. Caleb heated soup, ate 2 spoonfuls, and forgot the rest. Sadie had not touched her food. When Caleb noticed, he looked from her bowl to his own half-full cup and understood something that felt uncomfortably like being seen. He carried his soup back to the table and finished it slowly. Only then did Sadie rise, cross the kitchen without looking at him, and take 3 careful bites from her bowl. Caleb sat very still. The house did not feel warm yet, but for the first time in weeks, it did not feel entirely empty. By the 4th night, Caleb had learned the shape of Sadie's silence. It was not empty. It had corners, warnings, and small doors. She slept near the front entrance with her body facing the threshold, but she no longer kept her eyes open until dawn. She ate only after he ate. She drank only after he filled his own glass. When he moved too quickly, her ears went back. When he lowered his voice, her breathing softened. Caleb began to understand that trust was not a thing given all at once. It was a trail of crumbs left across a cold floor, one careful step at a time. The house changed in ways so small no one outside would have noticed. A second bowl near the sink. A folded blanket by the couch. A leash hanging beside his work jacket. A few dog hairs on his sleeve that he did not brush away. Yet the porch light still stayed off. The phone still went unanswered after dark. And every night, around the hour when rain thickened against the roof, Caleb found himself sitting at the kitchen table with one hand near the drawer where his dog tags lay hidden. He never opened it when Sadie watched. But Sadie always watched. That evening, a helicopter passed somewhere beyond the tree line, low enough for the sound to tremble through the windows. Caleb's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. His shoulders tightened. The kitchen light seemed too bright, then too far away. Sadie lifted her head from the entry rug. She did not run to him. She stood slowly, as if approaching a wounded bird, and crossed the room with quiet paws. Caleb set the spoon down carefully. "It is nothing," he said. Sadie stopped beside his chair and looked at his hand. It was shaking. Not much. Enough. The helicopter faded into the Oregon sky, but Caleb stayed there, locked in the aftersound. Sadie lowered herself beside his boot, her body warm against his ankle. She did not demand comfort. She offered weight. Caleb stared at her for a long time. "You do this with everybody?" he asked. Sadie blinked once, unimpressed by the question. The next morning, Dr. Rachel Moore examined Sadie at the small veterinary clinic near Main Street. The room smelled of clean towels, dog treats, and antiseptic. Sadie stood still on the rubber mat, while Caleb kept one hand near her shoulder, not holding her down, just letting her know he had not stepped away. Dr. Moore checked her ears, her teeth, the old healed line near her shoulder, and the slight droop of one ear. "She has been through changes," the veterinarian said. "But she is not broken." Caleb looked at Sadie. "People keep saying that like they are trying to convince me." Dr. Moore smiled gently. "Maybe I am trying to convince you about both of you." Caleb looked away first. On the drive home, Sadie rested her head against the passenger door, but her eyes stayed on him through every turn. That night, Caleb opened the drawer for the first time while she was in the room. The dog tags lay inside, cold and dull under the kitchen light. He touched them with 2 fingers, then pulled his hand back as if metal could remember too much. Sadie rose from the rug, came to his side, and placed her nose against the drawer. The tags gave a soft clink. Caleb closed his eyes. "Not tonight," he whispered. Sadie did not move away. She sat there beside the drawer, guarding not the metal, but the man who still believed hiding it meant surviving. The first night Sadie saved Caleb did not look like rescue. It looked like a kitchen light left on after midnight, a cold cup of coffee beside an untouched plate, and a white U.S. Marine sitting too still at a wooden table while rain pressed its fingers against the windows. Caleb had tried to sleep. He had turned off the lamp, locked the door, checked the windows, and told himself the day was over. But the house had become loud in the dark. The refrigerator clicked. The floor settled. A branch scraped softly against the siding. Then thunder moved across the Oregon hills, low and distant, and something inside him answered before he could stop it. He found himself at the kitchen table with both hands flat on the wood, breathing like the room had forgotten how to hold air. Sadie watched from the entry rug. She did not rush him. She had learned that some storms outside were smaller than the ones people carried behind their eyes. Caleb stood suddenly, chair legs scraping the floor. He walked toward the front door, not with purpose, not with a code or keys, only with the blank motion of a man trying to leave a feeling instead of a house. Sadie rose. Her paws made no sound on the worn boards. Caleb reached for the doorknob. Sadie stepped in front of him and sat. Not growling, not baring teeth, just sitting between him and the night. "Move," Caleb whispered. His voice was rough, ashamed before it was angry. Sadie looked up at him with amber eyes that did not argue. Caleb tried to step around her. She moved with him, calm and certain, blocking the door with her body as gently as a prayer can block a fall. He turned away, one hand over his mouth, and the breath he had been holding broke loose in a sound he would have hidden from any human being. Sadie left the door then. She crossed to the couch, took the edge of the old wool blanket in her teeth, and dragged it across the floor. It bunched beneath her paws twice. She stopped, pulled again, and brought it to Caleb's feet. Then she pressed her head against his knees. Caleb stared down at her. The blanket smelled faintly of his truck, rain, and dog fur. He lowered himself to the floor because standing suddenly felt too hard. Sadie climbed halfway into his lap, heavy and warm, her body angled across him like she was pinning him gently to the present. Caleb's hands hovered in the air. Then one settled on her back. Her breathing was slow. He matched it without meaning to. In, out, in, out. The thunder moved farther away. The house returned piece by piece. The table, the sink, the rain, the closed drawer with the dog tags, the German shepherd who refused to let him disappear into the dark alone. After a long while, Caleb whispered, "You do not have to stay." Sadie did not lift her head. Her tail moved once against the floor. That was her answer. Near dawn, the porch light clicked on for the first time in weeks. Caleb sat on the floor beneath it, wrapped in the old blanket, Sadie asleep against his side, her paw resting over one of his hands as if holding him there until morning could prove it had come back. Morning found Caleb on the kitchen floor with the porch light still burning and Sadie asleep against his side. The rain had stopped sometime before sunrise, leaving the windows silver with mist and the yard smelling of wet cedar, cold grass, and the first week promise of a clearer day. Caleb did not move at first. His back hurt from the floor. His coffee had gone cold on the table. The old wool blanket had slipped halfway off his shoulder. But Sadie's paw still rested across his hand, and that small weight kept him from rushing into shame. He had survived the night. Not cleanly, not proudly, but he was there. When Sadie opened her amber eyes, she did not seem surprised to find him beside her. She only lifted her head, checked his face, and breathed out as if confirming something important had stayed. Caleb touched the fur between her ears. "Breakfast?" he asked. Sadie stood first, stretched carefully, then walked to the kitchen bowl and waited. Caleb almost poured food for her and skipped his own, the old habit rising before thought. Sadie looked at him, then at the cabinet. He understood. "All right," he said softly. "Both of us." He made toast, scrambled 2 eggs, and filled her bowl. She did not eat until he took the first bite. That should have embarrassed him. Instead, it steadied him. By 8, he had turned his phone face up. There were messages from Pastor James Miller, one from Emma Collins, and a voicemail from the garage where he worked part-time. Caleb stared at them for a long while, thumb hovering over the screen. Sadie sat beside his chair, close but not pressing. He called Pastor James first. The older man answered on the second ring, voice gentle, as if he had been expecting the call without demanding it. "Morning, Caleb." Caleb looked toward the porch light glowing in daylight, foolish and holy at the same time. "Can I bring the dog to group tonight?" There was a pause, not of surprise, but of gratitude being given room. "Bring her every time." Caleb ended the call before his voice could fail him. Sadie's tail moved once. The day became a series of small returns. He took a shower. He opened the curtains. He carried the unopened mail to the table and sorted it into careful stacks. He drove to the grocery store with Sadie in the truck, her blanket folded on the passenger seat, her nose pointed toward the cracked window. At the store, he bought dog food, apples, bread, coffee, chicken, and a small blue-collar tag shaped like a bone. At the engraving machine near the front, he typed her name with slow, deliberate fingers. "Sadie." The machine buzzed, and Caleb watched the letters appear, bright against metal. It was a simple thing. A tag. A name. But when he clipped it onto her collar outside the truck, Sadie lowered her head and stood very still, as if learning the sound of belonging. That evening, Caleb drove to the Veterans Community Center. He almost turned around twice. Sadie noticed both times. Each time, she placed her chin on the console between them until he kept going. Pastor James met them at the door without a speech. "Good to see you," he said. Then he looked at Sadie. "Good to see both of you." Inside, folding chairs formed a loose circle. Coffee steamed in paper cups. Men and women Caleb recognized looked up, nodded, then made room without asking questions. Caleb sat near the back. Sadie lay across his boots, warm and quiet, anchoring him to the room. When it was his turn to speak, he stared at the floor for a long time. "I turned the porch light on last night," he said finally. No one laughed. No one asked why that mattered. Pastor James nodded like he understood completely. Sadie pressed her shoulder against Caleb's shin. And for the first time in months, Caleb stayed until the meeting ended. For 2 weeks, Caleb kept showing up. Not perfectly, not loudly, but enough for the porch light to become part of the neighborhood again, glowing each night through the Oregon mist like a small signal that someone inside had chosen to remain. Sadie learned the rhythm of his days. Morning walks before the garage opened. Breakfast for both of them, never one without the other. Afternoons at the Veterans Outreach Center, where she lay across Caleb's boots during meetings and lifted her head whenever someone's voice shook. Even Mrs. Linda Harper from next door began waving from her mailbox again, pretending not to notice that Caleb now waved back. But healing is not a straight road. It bends without warning. It circles old places. It tests locked doors. The box arrived on a Thursday afternoon, left on Caleb's porch by a storage company with a printed label and rainwater darkening one corner. Caleb stood over it for nearly a minute before touching it. Sadie stood beside him, her body still, ears forward. Inside were things he had avoided for years: folded uniform pieces, a canvas pouch, an old photograph from a unit cookout, a patch with frayed stitching, and a small envelope containing a note from a Marine who used to call him brother. Caleb did not read the note. He did not need to. His hand found the photograph first. Young faces in desert sunlight. Arms around shoulders. Smiles that belonged to men who believed tomorrow was owed to them. Caleb's breath shortened. The room narrowed. Sadie stepped closer and touched his knee with her nose. He placed the photograph face down on the table, then shoved everything back into the box with sudden carefulness, as if careful hands could hide a breaking heart. "Not now," he said. Sadie followed him to the kitchen drawer where the dog tags rested. Caleb opened it, stared at the metal, then closed it harder than he meant to. The tag clinked inside. Sadie flinched, but she did not move away. Caleb saw that and hated himself for it. "I am fine," he said. The words were too sharp to be true. That evening, he did not go to group. Pastor James called twice. Emma sent one message asking how Sadie was settling in. Caleb turned the phone off and placed it face down on the counter. He closed the curtains. He left the porch light off. The house seemed to shrink around him, returning to its old shape like a wound remembering how to close. Sadie refused dinner. Caleb did not notice at first. He sat in the living room without the lamp on, the unopened storage box on the floor in front of him. Rain began again after dark, soft at first, then steady against the roof. Sadie moved between Caleb and the front door once. Then again, when he did not respond, she walked to the kitchen drawer and stood there, staring at it. Caleb looked away. "Leave it," he whispered. Sadie whined low, not begging, not frightened, only urgent in a way that made the air feel thin. Caleb covered his face with both hands. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then Sadie rose on her back legs, hooked one paw carefully against the drawer handle, and pulled. The drawer slid open with a soft wooden scrape. The dog tags spilled into view, catching a thin line of streetlight through the curtain. Caleb lifted his head. Sadie took the chain gently in her mouth, turned toward the front door, and stood waiting in the dark. Sadie stood at the front door with Caleb's dog tags hanging gently from her mouth, the chain glinting in the thin streetlight that slipped through the curtains. She did not pull away when Caleb rose from the chair. She did not run. She simply waited, eyes fixed on him, as if the metal was not a memory to fear but a key he had forgotten how to use. "Sadie," he said, and his voice came out smaller than he expected. The German shepherd turned toward the door and gave one soft whine. Caleb looked at the dark porch, the phone turned off on the counter, the storage box sitting open on the floor like a storm that had found its way inside. He understood then that Sadie was not asking him to leave. She was asking him not to stay hidden. When he took one step forward, she backed gently toward the door. When he stopped, she stopped too. The dog tags rested against her tongue without a sound. Caleb reached for the knob, unlocked it, and opened the door to the cool Oregon rain. Sadie stepped onto the porch, lowered the tags onto the welcome mat, then nudged them forward with her nose. Across the driveway, Mrs. Linda Harper's kitchen light was on. Sadie looked at that house, then back at Caleb. "No," Caleb whispered. It was not anger. It was fear wearing his voice. Sadie picked up the tags again, trotted down the porch steps, crossed the wet grass, and stopped at Linda's walkway. Caleb froze in the doorway. He could have called her back. She would have come. But she looked over her shoulder with such steady sorrow that the command died before it reached his mouth. Linda Harper opened her curtains first, then her door. She stood in a robe, gray hair loose, one hand on the frame. Sadie placed the dog tags at her feet, then turned and looked toward Caleb's dark house. Linda did not ask the wrong questions. She knew enough about lonely men, dark windows, and porch lights that stopped burning. She picked up the tags, held them carefully, and called out through the rain, "Caleb, honey, I am coming over." Sadie walked beside her, not rushing, not celebrating, only making sure the message arrived. Linda knocked softly on Caleb's open door before stepping inside. "I am going to turn on this lamp," she said. Caleb did not answer. He stood in the hallway with rain blowing against his socks, unable to decide whether to be ashamed, grateful, or angry that a dog had carried his name into the hands of a neighbor. Linda placed the dog tags on the kitchen table. "You do not have to talk," she said, "but you do have to let the room have some light." She turned on the lamp. Warm yellow spread across the table, the storage box, the old photograph, and Sadie standing beside Caleb like a guard posted against disappearance. A few minutes later, Linda used Caleb's phone to call Pastor James and Emma. No sirens, no panic, no shame dressed up as rescue. Just 3 people coming through rain because a German shepherd had learned that saving someone sometimes meant asking others to stand near him. When Pastor James arrived, he did not give a speech. He took off his wet coat, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the dog tags. Emma came last, breathless, with a folded shelter blanket in her arms. Sadie took the blanket from her hands and dragged it to Caleb's feet. Caleb sank down slowly, not because he was defeated, but because his legs had finally stopped pretending they could carry everything alone. Sadie pressed against his side. Caleb put one hand on her back and the other over the dog tags. "I was not going to do anything," he whispered. Pastor James nodded. "I believe you." Caleb's eyes filled. "I just did not know how to come back." Sadie leaned her full weight into him. Outside, the rain softened. Inside, the porch light clicked on again, and nobody asked who had turned it on. By spring, the shelter parking lot no longer looked the same to Caleb Turner. The rain still came down in thin Oregon lines, and the gravel still held puddles near the front steps, but the place did not feel like a building full of last chances anymore. It felt like the place where 2 unwanted souls had first recognized each other through a kennel gate. Caleb walked in with Sadie beside him, her black and tan coat brushed clean, amber eyes calm, blue name tag shining softly beneath her collar. She no longer lowered her head at every doorway. She no longer lay ready to be returned. She walked close to Caleb's leg, not hiding behind him, not pulling ahead, simply belonging beside him. Emma Collins came from behind the desk and stopped when she saw them. For a moment, she did not speak. Shelter workers learn how to say goodbye to animals they love, but sometimes goodbye comes back wearing peace. "Look at you," Emma whispered. Sadie stepped forward and pressed her head into Emma's hand. Caleb held out a framed photo wrapped in brown paper. "For the board," he said. Emma opened it carefully. In the photograph, Sadie lay beneath Caleb's porch light, one paw resting near his old marine boots, the wool blanket folded beside her, the dog tags hanging on a small hook by the door. The light above them was warm, steady, and unmistakably on. Emma read the small label at the bottom of the frame. "Adopted." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. Caleb looked down at Sadie. She earned a better picture than the one on that kennel card. Emma carried the frame to the adoption wall, where smiling dogs and cats looked out from little squares of proof that love sometimes arrives late, but still arrives. She removed Sadie's old card from a folder behind the desk. "Returned 3 times. Caleb took it when she offered. The words did not hurt the same way now. They were not the end of her story. They were the road that had led her home. Later that afternoon, Caleb drove to the Veterans Community Center. Pastor James was setting up chairs, Mrs. Linda Harper had brought cookies, and a few people were already pouring coffee. Caleb hung his dog tags around his neck before he went inside. His hand trembled only a little. Sadie noticed, leaned against his knee, and waited until the tremor passed. During group, Caleb spoke longer than he had before. Not about everything. Healing does not demand a full confession all at once. He only said, "I thought I adopted her because nobody wanted her. Turns out she knew I was the one still waiting to be chosen." No one rushed to answer. Sadie rested across his boots, eyes half closed, while the room held the words gently. That night, back home, Caleb turned on the porch light before sunset. Sadie lay beneath it with the old blanket near her paws. The dog tags caught the light when Caleb sat beside her on the steps. He looked at the quiet street, the wet grass, the neighbor's glowing window, and the German shepherd who had carried his name back to the world when he had forgotten how to answer. Sadie placed her head on his knee. Caleb rested his hand between her ears. He had signed the papers that made her his dog, but in the silence under that porch light, he understood the deeper truth. She had adopted him too.